The Gospel of Mark records the sending out of Jesus' followers. It's not at the end, in Matthew, and he sends them out, go to the world, make disciples. But this happens earlier in Jesus' ministry in the Gospel of Mark. And it doesn't happen after the leader leaves. Mission happens because this leader, Jesus, is empowered and sent out newly minted leaders. And this is more than an internship. While they're gone, we learn, if you read the gospel, that John the Baptizer is executed by order of Herod. Mark calls them apostles in his version. Now, an apostle is one who has seen the risen Christ, but we haven't gotten there in this story, have we yet? So this is a confluence of times coming together. This is not a linear story. Something to remember about the Gospels in general. These disciples or apostles, they've been out on the road. 2 by 2 they were sent out, some of you remember the story. They've been teaching, healing, casting out demons, doing what Jesus was doing. With word of the violent death of John, the time away from their teacher and communities of belonging, they returned to Jesus to report, to reflect, and to restore. Hear these words from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 30 through 34. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves, and rest for a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like a sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. What follows in the gospel story is the meal that feeds over 5,000 people. The disciples and Jesus did not get a whole lot of downtime, but they did remove themselves for a brief pause to a deserted place. We may surmise it was a place where they could pray together, discern together, reconnect with each other, and with God's presence. I wonder if they were able to experience a sense of sacred presence then, later, in the meal with the multitude. Certainly, you and I would claim that God was present just as lively there as in the deserted place. But did the disciples perceive it? When and where have you sensed God's presence, whispers of divine grace, palpable sensations of sacred quality, witnessing a baptism or a work of art, a reunion with a friend, in the midst of grief even? People report experiencing God's presence in nature quite a lot, right? The beach, the ocean with the waves keeping their own rhythm, by a mountain stream or a waterfall in a wooded forest, or even the desert landscape. It always surprises me that people will name this sanctuary as a place where they experience the presence of God. It shouldn't surprise me, because I too have felt whispers of divine presence in this space. When we began broadcasting Sunday worship from the sanctuary during the pandemic shutdown, it also surprised me how much people appreciated just being able to see the sanctuary with music coming from it and people praying in it. And yet it also made sense. A number of years ago, a clergy colleague of mine walked into this sanctuary midweek and stopped and said, "This is holy space." I asked her, how do you perceive that? She said, "I can feel the prayers that have been prayed. I can feel the people that have prayed them." Now, I cannot prove any of the prayers and people linger, but it makes me wonder how what is done in a space can transform it and transform the people in it over time. Minister and author Howard Thurman stressed the importance of coming face to face with God. He writes this: "The central fact in religious experience is the awareness of meeting God. The descriptive words are varied. Sometimes it's called an encounter, sometimes a confrontation, and sometimes a sense of presence. What is insisted upon, however, is that the individual is seen as being exposed to direct knowledge of ultimate meaning, in which all that that individual is becomes clear as immediate and often distinct revelation. They are face to face with something which is so much more and so much more inclusive than all of their awareness of themselves, that in that moment, there are no questions. Without asking, somehow they just know. The mind apprehends the whole," he continues. "The individual in that experience seems to come into possession of what they have known as being true all along. The thing that is new is the realization. And this is of profound importance. The first time I walked a labyrinth, I got to the middle, and the word home, I heard the word home. Every time I walk the labyrinth, have since, I have a memory of that experience. It's not exactly the same experience, but the realization of that experience continues. When we experience a sense of God's presence in a place, we associate that place with God. We may return to it again and again in the hope of reliving or experiencing it again, like a Pavlovian response, if you will, right? The sights, the sounds, the sensations even of touch and smell can transport us to moments when we felt God to be so close, when it was all real. Simply recalling from memory that special location or that event can land us in a sense of presence without actually having to be there. Frank Rogers teaches at Claremont School of Theology, and he's been here a few times, speaking and leading sessions on the compassion practice he and a colleague developed over a number of years ago, and they run the Center for Engaged Compassion. Loving God, loving ourselves, our neighbors, and our enemies is hard, challenging work. Compassion practice is a holistic means of living into that kind of compassion. Dr. Rogers has a book coming out this month called Cradled in the Arms of Compassion. It's the story of his own healing, his journey of healing from childhood sexual abuse. October is Domestic Violence Prevention Month. It's a hard read. It's also an inspiring and instructive read. Along his journey to seek out his own well-being, he goes on a retreat at Our Lady of the Redwoods, which is about 50 miles from Eureka. And if you know where Eureka in California, it's way up in the northwest. And it's a very isolated part of our state. Very isolated, and some might even say desolate. It's a Trappistine community of Cistercian nuns. And apparently Thomas Merton had visited there and spent some time too. Sister Veronique, an older nun who'd grown up in the countryside of Belgium, looked after Frank during his stay. She asked him, "What do you seek from God while you're here?" And he answered, "The truth." "The truth about what?" she asked. And in her presence of hospitable kindness, he was able to answer the truth about the pain and how the pain is healed. She didn't ask about what the pain was. She didn't need to. She just wanted and needed to hold sacred space, as that community did for him. During that week of meditation, silent and guided, the rhythms of monastic life, Frank sought the truth and came to know it and experience a little more healing on his own journey. It was hard work, and it was made possible by his own vulnerability and the crucible of sacred space created by these nuns having prayed and been present to the presence of God for decades in that place, and the crucible of the sacredness of the redwood forest on its own. Before Frank left, he thanked Sister Veronique for all of her loving kindness that she freely gave to him. Nodding, she said, "One thing I know, kindness does not take the pain away, but it can keep the spirit alive while going through it." And putting her hand on her chest, she said, "What you found at the monastery, it's not here." She patted, as if patting her own heartbeat. It's not here. It's in you. It's in you. The places and experiences in which we have felt God close are there to teach us and remind us and root us to the deeper truth. The sacred dwells within you, within each of us. The heartbeat of God pulses in you. And we need spaces that remind us again and again of our belovedness, because we forget. We do. We forget. I know I do. And when people forget their belovedness, our capacity for kindness diminishes. The meal that follows that brief period of rest and prayer and reflection with Jesus and the disciples and his friends, right? That meal is a kindness, and that kindness is a bringing of sacred presence in material things, of fish and bread. The kindness is the activity of blessing and distributing. The kindness is what brings their experience of sacred presence to people hungry for hope, for bread, for care, for knowledge of God for themselves, to experience God for themselves. The flame of God's Spirit, it resides in each of us. And we go to sacred spaces and have sacred experiences to remind us of that, so that we take that with us wherever we go, and let ourselves be vulnerable even beyond that space, so that the Spirit can blow into us and through us. I was looking for music, and I found this one in my files. I thought, this is what this message is, and I invite you to sing the chorus with me. Belovedness.